Welcome to the University of Michigan Dentistry Podcast Series, promoting oral health care worldwide.
The 3 layers of 28 gauge green wax have been removed from beneath the Pontic, and the model has been lubricated. Impression plaster then is placed on the buccal surface to form the splint that will hold the Pontic. Impression plaster is also placed on the lingual surface and carefully teased under the Pontic. The occlusal portion is trimmed back so that the articulator can be closed. The interdental space area is opened also for access in sawing later in this procedure. And the splint then is contoured. The splint now has hardened, and you will note the finished shape. You'll note that it has been trimmed back on the occlusal surface, and the embrasure interdental spaces have been opened, and it is cleared of the occlusal cusp of the opposing arch. You'll note that the interdental space area has been opened to allow access for sawing. A saw blade then is used to separate the Pontic from the molar and bicuspid wax patterns. The die now can be removed, and we examine the retainer. You'll note the roughness where the saw blade has cut the wax. This now will be smoothened. The molar is likewise removed, and you'll note the area that needs to be modified on this wax pattern. At this time, you can see how the plaster splint cradles and holds the Pontic wax pattern. The mesial surface of the molar now has been recontoured, and it is placed back into the model, and we will scribe the area where the soldering lug will be placed. It should be in the very center of the Pontic and the molar wax-up. This notch then is further refined with the wax spatula, and then a 170 or 171 carbide burr can be used to form this lug either by spinning or by carving. The lug in the bicuspid is prepared in a similar manner. You'll note here that the burr is being used as a carving instrument, rough forming the shape of the soldering lug. This can be also spun to form the shape of the lug. This will save gold in the bicuspid casting. The bicuspid wax pattern has now been sprued. And you'll note we've extended the sprue former with utility wax. We've used a 12 gauge metal sprue, and this has been sprued on the lingual cusp of the bicuspid at a 45-degree angle so that the gold will flow both in the occlusal surface and on the lingual surface. We have invested this so it is 1/4 of an inch from the top of the investing ring, and this will be invested in luster cast. The molar has been sprued. You'll note again that we have extended the sprue former with utility wax, and that we have used 14 gauge wax Y sprues attached in the area where there are no centric stops. This is attached firmly to this occlusal surface, and this has been centered. You will note also that this has been sprued so that it is 1/4 of an inch from the top of the investment ring to allow dissipation of the gases. The castings have now been made and they are tried back on the die. They should be inspected to see if there are no bubbles inside, they are pickled, and they are polished to a rubber wheel finish using sand discs and rubber wheels. The margins should be sharply adapted to the margins of the die, and the sprues have been removed, the contact has been adjusted, and the occlusal surface has been roughly refined. At this point, we should check the occlusal surface. Sometimes the sprue area will be high, and at this time this should be picked up and adjusted. This can be marked with articulating paper. You should be able to see centric stops in the same areas that we have developed them in the wax patterns. At this time, we will refine the soldering lugs. The 170 carbide is used to refine this, always rotating so that the burr seats into the lug itself, so it does not skate around the casting. This is machined so that it has very sharp detail. Care must be taken not to perforate the crown. This can be removed and observed in the internal surface to see if there are no perforations. Usually the marginal ridge is thick enough to allow sufficient room for the lug placement. The same is done with the bicuspid. Wax then will be flowed into the soldering lug area. The soldering lug in the casting should be lubricated, and then regular wax is flowed into the details of the soldering lug, and then finger pressure is used to condense the wax. This will drive the wax into the details and allow it not to shrink. The same is done for the soldering lug on the bicuspid. The wax is flowed into the details of the soldering lug and then condensed with finger pressure. Additional wax can be used to build up this area, both on the bicuspid and on the molar, and additional finger pressure is used where necessary. Then the occlusal anatomy can be carved with a wax spatula, developing the marginal ridge form and removing excess flash on the occlusal surface of the casting. The plaster splint is removed, and the waxed Pontic is very carefully removed from the model, taking care not to distort the soldering lugs. When this is removed, then we examine the details of the lugs, and if this is correct, then the surface underneath the lugs should be finished. This has now been sprued, and you'll note the extension of the sprue former. An 8-gauge metal sprue has been placed, and a vent of 18-gauge wax is placed about 4 or 5 millimeters from the attachment of the metal sprue. The area under the soldering lugs has been refined and finished. The wax vent aids in rapid cooling of the cast pattern. We also try to keep 1/4 of an inch of investment above the wax pattern. And this is invested in luster cast and cast in Crown and Bridge Gold.
You've been listening to a presentation from the University of Michigan School of Dentistry, which is dedicated to supporting open learning and open educational resources. This recording is licensed under the Creative Commons. It may be reused and redistributed for nonprofit use. Please attribute materials to the University of Michigan School of Dentistry and redistribute under this same license. For more information on how this and other University of Michigan School of Dentistry recordings may be used, visit www.dent.umich.edu/license.